Hi, I'm here to talk about the newest blog post for YCS Pittsburgh and how it affected the overall Genesys format, as well as covering what I believe to be some of the newest updates and I think personally some of the adjustments that I would have made if I were on the team. Let's go ahead and talk about them. Alright, so I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I was initially going to go ahead and talk about my personal deck for the format, Ninja, and discuss the different techs and all those kinds of things involved with it. However, as I was looking at it, I realized that there is a new recap blog for YCS Pittsburgh by Konami. So we're going to go ahead and talk about that, but before we go ahead and do so, I want to discuss quickly the top 8. The top 8 was a number of decks, including Automat, Dragatail, Punk, Archmage, Radiant Typhoon, and Vanquish Soul. A lot of these are not surprising, to be honest with you. Vanquish Soul as a deck was one of the strongest decks that performed last format. Punk has always been an existing sort of deck that has done very well overall. Radiant Typhoon is one that a lot of people hold problems with, and I think is understandable in terms of its strengths, but it is also very susceptible to a longer grind game. It has that ability to play a longer grind game due to its recursiveness, especially with some of the if you happen to play some of the runic cards. But a variant also didn't play runic, just played it pure with a ton of spell adding and a number of different other cards. And the winner ended up being Automat. Automat as a strategy is very strong. And if you want to go ahead and take a look at the profile of the first place winner, it's not right here. Dwayne ended up talking a lot about what his strategy for Automat was. He's a big Zexal fan, and one of the things he stated was the best card in the overall format was Traptrix Rafflesia, to counter the best non-engine in the format, Droll and Lockbird. Now, Droll as a concept is very divisive, of course. I am personally okay with it existing within Genesys format, and the reason why I'm okay with it existing in general is because in terms of having a going second nature, Droll has the ability to stop your opponent from comboing off. However, for the game plan overall, going second is very, very difficult to accomplish within the format overall. There is not a lot of things you can do enough of an engine to break through an established board that says, I'm holding back, I'm doing nothing, and then I'm going to try to break it later. If you play enough of a spell negate to stop the breakers, it's a lot harder to go ahead and deal with, especially if you're doing that. Unless you're playing a pure going second, focusing all of your points on your going second engine and just OTKing that way, it's hard to go ahead and play that. So Droll is one of the few cards that I think is relatively fine for the format, and they're doing their best to go ahead and accomplish this by having breakers that are 0 points, including Dark Ruler as well as Ultimate Slayer. These cards are both very strong, but if you notice that there's, in general for nearly every single list, there is 9 total non-engine / engine requirement / non-engine requirements that are in here with Dark Ruler, Ultimate Slayer, and Droll and Lockbird. And this tends to follow the sort of same deal that a lot of people have to deal with. In general, you have about 9 slots for non-engine. 3 DD Crow, 3 Kaijus, 3 Drolls. That's it for this list. If we go back to the Punk list, we have a similar amount. 3 Fuelos, 3 Droll, 2 Book of Eclipse, a Ghost Ogre, and then 2 Skullmeister. Ghost Ogre being searchable, so it could even be considered a somewhat of a starter. However, you notice that there's a lower amount of non-engine you can really play because a lot of the points cards exist for that. So with that, each of these having between, so far it's like 12, sometimes there's a higher amount. A higher amount cards include Archmage. Archmage has a decent bit of non-engine. 3 Droll, 3 Nib, 3 DD Crow, 3 Crossout for the Droll, 2 Ogre, and 2 Ghost Mourner. But allowing you have that is something that is a little bit actually like pretty strong, and you do need, with Nib existing in the format, you would need Crossout Designator for this Nib. But that being said, non-engine is sparse throughout the rest of the whole format, and a lot of it is multiple card combos. Automat is a great example of this. By having your 4s and your monsters being able to go into Rafflesia before you start your mainline combo with any number of 7th Tachyon or 7th Ascension afterwards to start your full board plays and get more searches and send out on a full board by playing around both Droll and Nib by going to Rafflesia, you are just goated. You are perfectly fine with that. This all being said, let's go ahead and take a look at how Konami interprets this and everything that's going here. YCS Pittsburgh Genesys recap. This states that a lot of the time they were discussing initially about the differences that has come to adjustments of Vanquish Soul. Now you may think this might be a little bit odd because Vanquish Soul was heavily hit on the last list, and they're thinking that it would go ahead and slow down. Well, it has slowed down, but it's not dead. And that's what they want. They really wanted to go and have access to the Vanquish Souls, have Vanquish Souls still be a playable deck within the format, and they realize the power of Holly Sue is still very strong. They're willing to cut Jiaolong, having a second copy of Holly Sue to get those points, giving up Jiaolong, and allowing for Fires to exist more for Red Genesys as a secondary engine within the type. Let's see here. Pittsburgh's The Rise of General Summon Engine, Speed Roy, Terratop, and Dodo Warrior. Phased out in favor of Eldan, Swen, and Chant. A much larger deck commitment, but the cards are interchangeable. The price was just reminded everyone how powerful the card is since usage went up, as opposed to when it was at 0, which is crazy, right? But it kind of makes sense because of the fact that Flying Sea was in the format. The engine of Dodo Warrior and Dodo Dwarf Go 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 Glove, or the Onomat, what's it called? Where are you? Onomato Kage. These three existing, those existing didn't really help with the engine being available because people were playing Flying Sea of Floodgate to get rid of it. Also, Goblin Biker Big Gabanga is a very good card now that Xyzs are back in the format, and Goblin Bikers as an engine are still very strong with these rank 3 plays. Most Xyzs living an Xyz monster that negates a spell trap, and one that negates a monster effect, backed up by removal. They also banish a bunch of stuff with Dim Fizz or Runic spells. Because reminds me of the flashback to Evil Zor Logia, Dolga, backed up by Macrocosmos and some traps. Okay, so they're basically saying they're recreating the same sort of end boards that Dino Rabbit did, which is interesting, yeah. Okay, talking about some of the more classic cards, including Dante, Breaksword, and Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon for some decks, and emerging Wind Witch cards in order to go even into Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. Let's see. One old favorite deck that made the field of 64 brought back the original Yangzing cards from Duelist Alliance and New Challengers. Yangzing is one of the strategies we're planning on adding in the next Rivalry of Warlords update. It was the only strategy we were planning to add that no one had brought previously. Oh, interesting. So in terms of Yangzing existing within the Rivalry of Warlords pool, which is their preliminary testing for everything they want to do with the new Genesys decks, they make all the new Rivalry of Warlords cards initially Genesys legal, at least in part. So, very interesting. The number of unique strategies that came to the Invitational went to 34 in Pittsburgh, but the strategies that went out were Spriggans, Punk, Blue Eyes, Exosister, Fire King, Jurak, Dinosaurs, Pearly, and Ashen. The biggest one that I see is Exosister not making it to the Invitational, which is very interesting. The hits are in part justified. Now it's going to take a lot more for Exosister to kind of exist within the format because of the points that are added to it and having to even cut Shifter. There's really no reason to want to even play Exosister at this point. When the new support comes out, it might even be crazier, and you might have to do some point readjustments to really play it, but still. And then in were all of these, and I think all of these are really good. Oddly enough, Megalith came in despite the fact that now there's a 33 point added to it. Other things that I think are interesting include Invoked Dracotale, Psychics in general as a strategy, not just Punk. Mitsurugi, even after its hit, is very interesting. Rose Dragons, of course, being a discovery that was found mostly online and is still relatively good despite the fact that the Burn FTK is no longer available. Regenesis, of course, included with Vanquish Soul, and maybe Pure Regenesis as well. K9, Pure K9 as well existing as some sort of 5 strategy. There are a number of things that you can cook with in this. I'm surprised I didn't see Ninja, but that still makes sense. I think that Ninja is in a fine position, and at a local level, it is a very strong deck. But I don't know how well it would get to that point compared to most of the other stronger strategies. A number of different hybrids, plus Monarchs. No one's summoning mechanic seems to rule them all. The biggest forbidden card was Pot of Greed. And Graceful Charity is down to 0 because of the amount that it would take to get even 2 Graceful Charity. You can get just about the same with 3 Pot of Greed, plus 10 points. True King of All Calamities is no longer existent, and Mirage of Nightmare now becoming a side and or main deck board in order to draw more cards into your hand is very interesting. And the price of Mana Forces going down is very strong. I think what needs to be also stated is we don't have the data for the amount of die rolls won, just in general. And I think that that is a strong factor in terms of what kind of strategy you can take into the format. How well can it play when going second versus how well can it play when setting up a board is very, very different. Some boards are unaddable because of the amount of non-engine that do exist within the format, and those non-engines have to be very, very powerful in order to destroy the whole board at that point. Let's see here. Last month's Vanquish Soul was an extreme performance outlier. This time around, there were no extreme performance outliers. In Pittsburgh's Invitational, there was a big group of decks that appeared 1 to 3 times, a small group that appeared 4 to 6 range. In Anaheim, we had 2 groups, and then Vanquish Soul at 12 reps. There will always be some decks that perform better than others, given a tournament, and there can only be one winner, but Pittsburgh's distribution with no huge outliers is more ideal. So the variety of decks existing, of 34 different strategies within the format existing, is what they would is what they want. There are 2 more YCS events happening this month, which means we're going to have 2 more YCS Invitational Champions for Genesys, including in YCS Bologna. And that's going to be something that I'm excited to see personally. And there's going to be the next Pointless update will be planned for December, so the rest of this month, we've got plenty of time, but the data has come in. One thing I want to say, and a lot of people have been saying, one of the biggest changes that I think exists for the format in general is the hitting and loss of what people believe to be a staple of the format, and something that I think was pretty cool, honestly, which was Rescue Ace Impulse. Rescue Ace Impulse and Fire Attacker, being able to draw 2, discard 1, when going second, not interrupting your opponent's plays, but getting you searches to go ahead and get everything further, is something that I think is sorely missed in the format. And the standard cards of having Nib and Droll being both 5 points while also having Impulse being 5 points is going to be a bit more difficult for you to justify just in general. I would have preferred the card to be at a lower point total so that it could be a possibility of filling up the slots of something like Ogre or Mourner in order to go ahead and get a draw into Nib. But overall, I can't say I'm too upset about a wider pool that exists overall. Radiant Typhoon is something that also has been a little bit more hit. Well, it hasn't been hit. I'm sorry. I don't mean to say that. It's a bit more... Player sentiment has been negative about Radiant Typhoon. And oddly enough, one of the best engines that kind of exist within the Radiant Typhoon archetype is the Goblin Biker and the Armored Xyz package in order to set up a near FTK board, but a lot of decks are doing that anyway when going first. I worry that a lot of times with Genesys and the tools that are available for going second, it is harder to actually go second in the format overall. And that could be a huge problem when it comes to the games. I've noticed in my personal testing that anytime that I have lost the dice roll, I've lost more. I've been able to go ahead and play and win more when I win the dice roll with nearly any deck that exists. But it's much harder to go ahead and exist in the format if you don't have a good way to either hold a breaker inside your hand, utilize that spell trap for either a discard when you're going first, or just be willing to go ahead and eat it when you have a spell that does nothing. overall, my excitement for Genesys still continues to be very strong. I think that they are seeing a lot more of the potential power that exists within the format, and the format overall is still fine when it comes to variety. However, there are a few outliers that I think exist. Droll and Nib, being some of the most popular, are helpful, but can be played for going first or second, so it's a bit more difficult to go ahead and set up. I think going first is one of the strongest things you can do, and the kind of card that enabled you to go first or second, being a draw to discard off of the Impulse Fire Attacker, is sorely missed. I think cycling your deck to get those better is just one of the more fun things you could do in terms of interrupting your opponent. And finally, if you'd use that, you can't droll them so much because you have to go ahead and do it on the search, and then you don't get your draw to. You have to wait for them to add, and then I guess you have to droll first in hand and then activate it to draw to discard one if you have both at the same time. Or you could draw into droll, and then you have to go and wait for the second search. Overall, I think that Impulse and Fire Attacker could have some better merit for a going second strategy, or a deck that, if it has to go second, has something that is more useful. You also end up having to play a brick, which is difficult to deal with. Those are my thoughts overall about the current meta and the current state of Genesys format. I'm excited to see what they change in December. I'm hoping it's not as many changes as before. And the reason why I also say that is because a lot of player sentiment comes from the fact that a lot of changes may be interesting, but it's also complex, and people think that more things die. They don't, but they think that, and they tune out. And they tune out and they try to sell their cards instantly. Genesys isn't going to be like that, y'all. But I don't think that it's going to inspire too much confidence if we have over 100 changes this next list. I think this list is perfectly fine in the regards of the engines. I think a few more hits need to be put in, and then we're going to see how well Hecka Hands and Cool Tune, KT, as the OCG calls it, affect the format overall in December. That being said, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Hopefully the legendary Synchro 5Ds decks end up being very interesting as well, and maybe Synchron can get a little bit of a boost in general. I hope you all have enjoyed this video. If you did, like button, subscribe. My name has been Doc Conrad, Yugioh. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.